The cold of Petrograd in February 1917 didn't just bite, it was a physical weight, pressing the breath from your lungs and turning the air into crystalline dust. But it was the silence, heavier than the snow piling on the ledges of St. Isaac's Cathedral, that truly terrified Alexei Fyodorov. Alexei was the cathedral's chief bell ringer, a zvonar, and for 25 years he had lived by the rhythm of bronze and rope. A normal day pulsed with sound, the high, quick strikes of the zazvoni signaling a service, the deep, mournful bong of the blagovest calling the faithful, and the joyous, full-throated trezvon of celebration. Today, there was only the stillness of a city holding its breath. Tsar Nicholas II was far away, the bread lines were miles long, and the city felt like a massive, beautiful coffin, waiting for the lid to be hammered shut. Alexei stood in the bell tower, a dizzying climb of 200 stone steps above the street. He was a man built like the bells he loved, sturdy, broad, and worn smooth by constant friction. His fingers, thick and calloused, traced the rim of the great tenor bell, Tsar Bell Minor, a beast of 200 poods, over 3 metric tons, that hadn't sounded its full voice in a week. He wasn't meant to be silent. His purpose was to ring, to speak for God above the clamor of man. But the Metropolitan had issued a decree of prudent quiet to avoid drawing crowds, or worse, the attention of the increasingly trigger-happy Okhrana, the Tsar's secret police. Below him, through the arched, snow-dusted louvers, the Winter Palace was a pale, monolithic presence. And across the Neva River, past the ice-chalked docks, the factories of the Vyborg district were a hive of smokestacks, not of production, but of protest. Suddenly, a sound ripped the silence. Not the metallic, harmonic sound of his bells, but the sharp, sickening crack of a rifle shot, followed by a fragmented, desperate shout that the wind immediately snatched away. Then another crack. Alexei's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He knew that sound. It wasn't the distant thunder of the war front. It was the beginning of the end for the order he had served his entire life. He turned from the icy air and descended quickly into the small, warm utility room carved into the stone wall, a space where he mended his ropes and brewed his weak tea. It was here, amidst the coils of hemp and the smell of oil, that he kept his own secret. Behind a stack of firewood, a section of the stone wall was loose. He slid it open, revealing a cramped, black space barely big enough for 2 men to crouch. He stared into the darkness, his breath fogging in the cold room. "Are you awake, Comrade Vronsky?" Alexei whispered, his voice catching on the title he still felt awkward using. A moment of silence, then a low, gravelly voice answered from the dark cavity, thick with exhaustion. "The city is awake, Alexei. I hear it breaking." The man hiding in the wall, Fyodor Vronsky, was a Bolshevik organizer, a powerful orator, and one of the Tsar's most wanted men. He had arrived 3 days ago, smuggled in a coffin intended for the priest's burial ground, and now his life and the fate of the workers he organized rested on the silence of the zvonar. Alexei closed the panel, his knuckles white. The bells were his voice, his sanctuary, and his lifeblood. Now, this tower, the holiest place in the city, was about to become the most dangerous sanctuary in all of Petrograd. The city had started to burn, and only the bell ringer knew the fire's spark was hiding just beneath his unrung bells. The day after the first gunshots, Petrograd became a city of rumor and fear. The usual morning rush of carts and streetcars was replaced by a slow, shuffling tide of people, their faces pale with cold and worry, congregating near the bridges. The word whispered from mouth to mouth wasn't revolution yet. It was bread. Alexei spent the morning perched on a small stool, meticulously checking the hemp ropes of the smaller Prazdnichny bells. It was a pretense, a way to occupy his hands and keep his eyes scanning the cathedral's nave below. He could feel the presence of Fyodor Vronsky in the wall, like a cold stone pressed against his own spine. The heat from the small fire Alexei kept was meant for his tea, but it was really for the man hiding just inches away. Vronsky hadn't moved or spoken since sunrise. The most difficult task was not physical, but auditory, the strain of listening for danger. Every creak of the ancient wooden staircase, every cough from Father Dmitri, every muffled shout from the square below was amplified in the resonant silence of the bell chamber. Around noon, the silence was shattered not by a hostile force, but by the nervous jingle of spurs. 2 soldiers of the Imperial Guard, their gray greatcoats dusted with snow, tromped heavily up the final spiral staircase. They were young, barely shaven, and smelled strongly of cheap tobacco and fear. Alexei stood, bowing his head respectfully. Batyushka, the taller of the two, a corporal named Grisha, addressed him roughly. "Are you alone up here?" Alexei gestured vaguely toward the roof. "Only the wind, Corporal. I am checking the ropes. We must be ready for Easter, whenever it may come." Grisha frowned, his hand resting on the hilt of his short sword. "You haven't heard anything unusual? Seen anyone come into the church? Agitators, maybe." "Agitators?" Alexei tried to sound confused. "Only cold people asking for alms. The church is quiet. The streets, though." He trailed off, letting the soldiers draw their own conclusions about the unrest outside. The second soldier, shorter and bundled up, moved towards the utility room, Alexei's sanctuary. "What is in here, Zvonar?" Alexei felt a drop of ice in his stomach. He stepped quickly, blocking the doorway with his solid frame. "Only my tea and firewood, soldier, and a few mice who pay more rent. It is cramped. You would soil your fine coat." Corporal Grisha stepped in, his boots grinding against the stone floor. He took a heavy drag from his cigarette. "There are rumors, old man, whispers, that the agitators are hiding in the roofs, watching the movements of the palace. No better vantage point than here." He didn't look at Alexei. His eyes were fixed on the arched windows overlooking the square. Alexei's mind raced. He had to draw their eyes to the windows, to the bells, anything but the wall. "If they were here, Corporal," Alexei said, his voice dropping conspiratorially, "they would be foolish to hide. The acoustics of this place are a marvel. A pin dropped in the baptismal font sounds like a thunderclap up here. If someone were hiding, the bells themselves would betray them." Grisha scoffed, but the idea seemed to momentarily ease his suspicion. He turned to the massive Tsar bell minor. "Ring it," Grisha commanded suddenly. Alexei blinked. "Corporal, we have orders." "I said ring it." Grisha's voice was sharp with authority and underlying panic. "Ring it once. The sound will shake them out if they are hiding. Do it." Alexei knew this was a test. The sound of the great bell would travel for miles, a defiant roar in the silence. It would draw attention, perhaps the wrong kind, but it was his only chance to distract them. He moved to the thick, worn rope, his hands finding the familiar loop. He took a deep, steadying breath, summoning every ounce of his strength. This strike was not for God or for the faithful. It was a lie, a defense, a message sent to the cold, dark cavity in the wall. Wait. Be silent. With a grunt, Alexei pulled the rope down, then released it, dodging the tremendous recoil as the heavy clapper swung in its arc. The sound was not just heard, it was felt. A low, resonant bong that vibrated through the stone, through the floorboards, and through the very bones of the soldiers. It was a sound of immense, crushing authority, a frozen chord that spoke of ages past, echoing with the weight of the empire. Grisha flinched, instinctively covering his ears. The sound goomed, rebounded, and slowly decayed into a shuddering echo that hung in the air like smoke. Enough, Grisha managed, his voice shaky. The acoustics are aggressive. Come, Yevgeny, let's report the tower is clean. As the soldiers clattered down the stairs, their nervousness evident in their hurried steps, Alexei leaned against the cold bronze of the Tsar bell miner, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The scent of ozone and dust lingered. He waited a long, tense minute for their footsteps to vanish completely. Then he turned to the wall and whispered into the cold stone, "Did you hear me, Fyodor?" After a long pause, the gravelly reply came, clearer this time, and filled with a dreadful gratitude. "I did, Alexei. It sounded like the voice of doom. Thank you for your warning." The massive, shuddering bong of the Tsar bell miner had done its job. It sent the soldiers retreating, convinced the old zvonar was harmlessly eccentric. But the sound had also drawn a new kind of attention, more focused and infinitely more dangerous. Late that evening, as the last light drained from the sky, painting the cathedral's dome in bruised purples and grays, Alexei finally opened the wall. Fyodor Vronsky crawled out, stiff and pale, but his eyes were burning with a fierce, cold resolve. "The soldiers are fools," Vronsky hissed, rubbing the circulation back into his legs. He wasn't a large man, but his presence seemed to fill the small room. "But that noise, Alexei, it told the whole city where I was. I felt it through the stone. It felt like a declaration." "It was a distraction, comrade," Alexei countered, offering him a stale piece of bread and a cup of warm tea. Vronsky accepted the offering gratefully. "Perhaps, but it also told me something else, Alexei. This tower is not just a hiding place. It is the highest point in the city. Do you know what that means?" Before Alexei could answer, Vronsky was already moving, ignoring his exhaustion. He pointed to the small, grimy windows overlooking the square, the vantage point the soldiers had scrutinized. "The revolutionaries in Vyborg are blind. They know the factories are striping, but they don't know where the government troops are moving. Is the Okrana shifting south? Are the Cossacks guarding the bridges? They cannot see. But we can." Vronsky turned, a revolutionary fire igniting his gaze. "This bell tower is our eyes, Alexei. It's the command post." Alexei was horrified. He was a man of God, of tradition, of quiet routine. He had hidden a revolutionary out of a simple, desperate feeling of righteousness, a desire to protect the vulnerable. But turning the holy spire into a military lookout, that was sacrilege. "No, Comrade Vronsky, this is a church, a sanctuary. We hide you, we feed you, but we do not fight from here. I cannot allow it." Vronsky stepped closer, his voice dropping to a persuasive, deadly, earnest whisper. "I do not ask you to fight, Alexei. I ask you to ring. The church is a sanctuary, yes, but sanctuaries must speak when the city is being strangled. You are a zvunar. You speak with the voice of God, do you not? Then speak the truth." He gestured to the ropes. "You have 3 primary bells up here, correct? The massive blagovest for solemn calls, the medium chasovoi for hours, and the high-pitched zazvonni for quick signals?" Alexei nodded, his throat tight. "Good. Then this is what you will do," Vronsky continued, leaning forward. "We need to guide the uprising. The streets are a chaos of signals, but the bells, Your bells will be the clear voice of order. Vronsky laid out a simple, terrifying code. One quick high chime of the zazvonni, danger, the okhrana or police are sighted in the square, clear the area. A sustained medium chime of the chasovoi, block, troops are moving to hold a major bridge or choke point, redirect the crowds. The full, deep bong of the blagovest, advance, the path is clear for the factory workers to move.
This is not fighting, Alexei, Vronsky finished, placing a hand on the bell ringer's massive shoulder. This is a language, the language of liberation, spoken through your beautiful instruments. You will stand here, at the highest point in the city, and act as the eye of the revolution. Alexei looked at the ropes, then at the man. His world, which had been neatly divided between the silence of prayer and the sound of tradition, was now collapsing into a single, terrifying duty. He was no longer just the bell ringer. He was the key signalman for a massive, bloody uprising.
If the okhrana catches me using this code, Alexei began, his voice barely audible.
They will hang you from your own bell rope, Vronsky finished grimly. But if they catch me, they will hang 10,000 others who depend on my signals. You are a good man, Alexei. Now, be a brave one. Vronsky then climbed back into the freezing cold of the bell chamber, pulled out a small, battered brass telescope, and placed it on the ledge. He was no longer hiding. He was watching. Vronsky spent the rest of the night pressed against the cold stone of the bell chamber's ledge, the small brass telescope glued to his eye. He was silent, motionless, a sentinel carved from the city's granite. Alexei, meanwhile, sat shivering in the utility room, trying to pray, but only hearing the drumbeat of his own anxiety. The morning broke not with a gentle dawn, but with a rush of gray, brutal urgency.
Alexei!
Vronsky's voice was a sharp whisper, cutting through the frosty air.
Look, the Moskovsky regiment. They're forming up near the Admiralty. They're not staying in their barracks. They're moving toward the Vyborg district.
Vronsky slammed the telescope shut.
They're planning to cut off the workers before they can reach the city center. We have to warn them. They must divert. Hold the bridges further north. We need the medium chime, the block signal.
Alexei stumbled out, his legs heavy with dread. He approached the ropes for the chasovoi, the medium bell whose function was usually to mark the liturgical hours. Its chime was stern, persistent, and meant to draw attention, but not panic.
Be precise, Alexei, Vronsky instructed, his eyes fixed on the street below. 5 slow, deliberate strikes. Don't rush the rhythm. They will be listening for the deviation from the usual pattern.
Alexei gripped the thick rope. He closed his eyes, momentarily discarding the image of the soldier's bayonet for the face of his own fear. He was not ringing a service. He was ringing a warning, a directive that would send thousands of men into harm's way, but possibly save the revolution. He pulled. The chasovoi bell swung, its tone a rich, urgent tenor that sliced through the city's din of distant shouts and rattling military carts. Boom. A pause. Boom. A pause. Boom. A pause. Boom. A pause. Boom. 5 distinct, perfectly timed strokes. The sound vibrated in the air, a message broadcast not through wire, but through atmosphere, carrying across the Neva River and settling over the factories like a new command. Alexei let the rope settle. He was shaking, not from cold, but from the realization of what he had just done. He was an accomplice to sedition. Vronsky was already back at the ledge, watching. Good! They are slowing. Look at the corners. They are turning back. They understood the signal. He clapped Alexei hard on the back, a gesture of fierce, revolutionary camaraderie. But before Vronsky could finish his praise, the moment of triumph snapped. Below, in the square, an officer in the uniform of the Imperial Police, not a young soldier, but a seasoned man with a sharp, suspicious eye, stopped dead in his tracks. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked up. He looked directly at the bell tower of St. Isaac's Cathedral. "That wasn't the hour," the officer said to his subordinate, his voice carrying clearly even from that height. "That was not the Chasovoi pattern. It was a signal. The tower is signaling." The officer drew a map from his coat and held it up. He traced the line from the cathedral across the river to the Viborg district. "They are guiding them. They know our movements. Get a runner to the commander of the Moskovsky regiment. Tell them to ignore any further civilian broadcasts and send the detachment here. Seal the cathedral." Alexei watched, frozen, as the officer pointed a gloved hand up at the bell chamber. He saw the cold, immediate understanding dawn on the policeman's face. They had sent a warning to the revolutionaries, but they had also broadcast their own location to the enemy. "They saw me," Alexei whispered, his face draining of chlor. "The officer saw the deliberate pattern. He knows." Vronsky's eyes narrowed as he saw the small squadron of armed police peeling away from the main column and heading directly to the main entrance of St. Isaac's Cathedral. "Get back in the wall, Fyodor," Alexei urged, pushing the smaller man toward the utility room. Vronsky didn't move. He looked from the oncoming police to the massive, silent Tsar bell minor. A grim smile touched his lips. "No, Alexei. They are coming for the Zvonar, and if they find the Zvonar, they will find the cell. The time for hiding is over. The time for the last clear signal has come."
The heavy oak doors of St. Isaac's slammed open below, echoing with the shouts of the police detachment. They were in the cathedral, searching. Alexei heard the frantic clatter of their boots on the marble floor, a sound of violation in the holy space. They would be at the base of the bell tower stairs in moments. "Alexei, listen to me," Vronsky commanded, his voice sharp and controlled. He was staring not at the police, but at the largest bell, the silent Tsar bell minor. "We need the advance signal. They must know the window is closing. They must move now, before the entire city is locked down." The advance signal was the deepest, most powerful bong of the Blagovest. It was a call of immense solemnity, used only for the highest holy days, or now for the final, desperate push of a revolution. "It will draw the entire city's attention," Alexei whispered, horrified. "Not just the workers, but the artillery, the cavalry, every soldier in the square will know exactly where we are." "Yes," Vronsky agreed, pulling a small, tightly rolled scroll of paper from his coat pocket. "I have the new directive for the Viborg Council. If I cannot deliver it, the momentum is lost. If I am caught, the revolution stalls. But if I can get this message to the streets—" He thrust the paper into Alexei's hand. "Your job is to ring the signal. My job is to ensure you have the time to ring it. Now, pull the rope, Alexei. Ring the final signal." The sound of boots was already echoing on the stone spiral stairs, closer and closer. Alexei gripped the rope for the Tsar bell minor. This bell was a beast. It required not just strength, but perfect timing and a deep knowledge of its rhythm. He pulled with a surge of adrenaline, his feet braced against the floor. Bong! The sound was immediate and crushing. It wasn't just loud, it was a physical blow to the air, vibrating the very stone of the tower. It traveled across the square, through the police who had just reached the bell tower's landing, and across the Neva, where the workers heard it not as a religious call, but as a thundering, undeniable command. The police detachment paused on the stairs, momentarily stunned by the sheer power of the bell's voice. Vronsky used that moment. He scrambled to the utility room, pushed aside the firewood, and revealed the secret panel in the wall. "They will not stop searching until they find the command post," Vronsky shouted over the deafening resonance. "You must draw them away from the room. Ring the bell again, Alexei. Draw them up!" He pulled a second massive strike. Boom! As the sound peaked, Vronsky did the unthinkable. Instead of hiding in the small cavity, he threw the scroll he had just given Alexei down the center of the stairwell. Then he grabbed a large coil of oily rope and flung it over the edge of the bell chamber, where it plummeted 200 feet toward the street. "I am the diversion," he yelled. "I must make them think the Zvonar is the organizer, and that I have escaped." He moved toward the nearest arched window. He pushed his small frame through the gap, scrambling onto the narrow ledge outside. He was preparing to climb down the rope, a suicidal descent to draw the eyes of the city away from the real command post. Suddenly, the leader of the police detachment burst through the top of the stairwell and skidded to a stop, pistol raised. He didn't see Vronsky, who was now clinging to the exterior ledge. He saw only Alexei, the Zvonar, sweat pouring down his face, his hands wrapped around the thick rope of the mighty bell. "Traitor!" the officer roared, aiming his pistol. Alexei instinctively ducked and pulled the rope one last tremendous time. Bong! The sound was so violent, so close, that the police officer was momentarily deafened, his shot going wide and hitting the stone wall beside Alexei's head. The force of the strike, the tremor, caused a section of the ancient plaster ceiling above the utility room to crack and fall. As the officer recovered, Alexei pointed wildly out the window at the figure scrambling down the rope. "He is escaping! The organizer!" The officer glanced out the window, saw the dark shape descending, and immediately abandoned the Zvonar and the bell chamber. "Down the rope! After him! Do not let the traitor escape!" Alexei stood alone, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and the ringing echo of the bell. He was safe for now, but he had been abandoned to the silence, clutching the new revolutionary directive in one hand. He moved to the small utility room and looked at the damage caused by the errant gunshot and the final violent ringing of the bell. The plaster had fallen, revealing a crude dynamite-like charge taped to the main ceiling support beam of the utility room, the chamber where he had hidden Vronsky. Vronsky hadn't intended to escape. He had rigged the hiding place to be destroyed if discovered, silencing the command post and protecting the Zvonar one last time. Alexei had survived, the signal was sent, and the revolution was moving. But the bomb was live, and the bell tower of St. Isaac's Cathedral was now a ticking time bomb. The silence that followed Vronsky's escape and the final thunderous bong of the Tsar bell minor was more chilling than any sound. Alexei stood alone, staring at the bomb Vronsky had left behind, a rough cluster of black powder and wires taped to the wooden support beam directly over the utility room. The bomb's wire led to a simple, crude detonator switch hidden beneath a pile of ropes. Vronsky's final message was clear. If the police returned and tried to dismantle the command post, they would destroy the evidence and the tower. Alexei didn't have much time to consider the ethics of his situation. The massive sound of the advance signal had done its work. Through the arched windows, he could see the distant flash of organized resistance from the Viborg factories. The revolution was truly underway. But the signal had also galvanized the enemy. Below, the sounds of scattered police pursuit were replaced by a new, heavier sound, the coordinated march of a full military company. A lieutenant colonel, his face crimson with fury and shame, had taken command. The officer who had been shot at on the stairs had reported the impossible. The Zvonar was an accomplice, and the organizer
had escaped down a rope.
"The organizer is a distraction!" The colonel's voice boomed from the cathedral floor, echoing up the stairwell. "The code was wrong from the tower! The old man is still up there! Seal the spire! Take the tower alive! I want the traitor and the signal device intact!" Alexei knew they would be on the stairs in minutes. They wouldn't send a small detachment this time. They would send 30 armed men. He looked at the bomb, then at the Tsar Bell miner. If he allowed them to take the tower, they would find the bomb, disable it, and turn the spire into an imperial observation post, a devastating blow to the revolution. He had to ensure this spire spoke no more for the Tsar. He had two choices: wait for them to climb, then attempt to use the bomb as a hostage to negotiate his freedom. But Alexei was no revolutionary. He was a gentle man. He would fail. Detonate the bomb now, destroying the evidence, the command post, and the military's high ground advantage, but sacrificing himself and severely damaging the holy tower he had sworn to protect. He clutched the revolutionary directive Vronsky had given him, a small, tightly rolled scroll of paper. This was the only piece of evidence that must escape. Alexei took a deep breath, his mind suddenly calm. His life had been the bells. His voice was their sound. If he could not ring them for God, he would make them ring for the people. He jammed the scroll into the thick, tightly braided rope of the Tsar Bell miner, pushing it deep into the fibers near the clapper, where it would be protected. Then, moving with the practiced urgency of a man preparing for a service, he ran to the utility room. He knelt and pulled aside the pile of ropes, revealing the crude wooden box of the detonator switch. The footsteps were loud now, filling the stone spiral, the heavy, coordinated beat of the military ascending the final flight. Alexei looked out the window one last time. He could see flashes and plumes of smoke rising from the Viborg district. They had heard the last bong. The revolution was happening. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer for the bells. He pressed the switch. The sound was not the harmonious, beautiful bong of bronze, but a choked, tearing boom of pure destructive force. The small, confined space of the utility room acted as a mortar, directing the blast straight up. The force was immense. Stone and wood shrieked. The explosion shredded the floor and ceiling of the utility room, ripping through the stone archway that supported the bells. The very platform Alexei stood on shuddered violently. The Tsar Bell miner, the magnificent sentinel of St. Isaac's, rocked wildly from its damaged supports. As the military storming the stairs were momentarily stunned, engulfed in dust and debris, the rope, with the precious directive hidden inside, snapped free from the damaged mechanism and whipped down the stairwell, tumbling past the frozen soldiers. Alexei was thrown back against the massive bronze casing of the Tsar Bell miner, the impact knocking the wind from his body. He felt the cold metal against his back as he slumped. The military, dazed but alive, finally reached the top platform. They found the bell chamber filled with smoke and debris. They saw the shredded utility room, the clear evidence of a destroyed command post. And they saw the Zvonar, bleeding and broken, slumped against the massive bell. "He did it! The traitor!" the colonel shouted, scrambling through the dust. But as they grabbed Alexei, pulling him away from the bell, they saw something impossible in the ruined chamber. The explosion had cracked the massive granite ledge and twisted the bell's rigging. With its support compromised, the Tsar Bell miner, the voice of the empire, had slipped slightly, tilting on its axis, its heavy bronze lip now resting on the stone floor. The most powerful bell in all of Petrograd was silenced, wedged immobile, its voice broken by the final desperate act of its bell ringer. Alexei smiled faintly as the soldiers dragged him away. He had done his part. The city's eye was blinded. The command post was destroyed. and the final message of the revolution was safe, tumbling down the stairs. The scene at the top of the St. Isaac's Bell Tower was of catastrophic silence. The police and military secured the area, finding no surviving organizer, only the broken Zvonar, Alexei, and the smashed remnants of the utility room. Alexei was immediately dragged away for interrogation, a single bloody footprint left on the stone floor where the Tsar Bell miner now rested, listing and silent. The real prize, Vronsky's revolutionary directive, was now far below. When Vronsky had rappelled down the bell tower on the rope, he hadn't escaped into the crowds. He had merely descended far enough to jump onto a roof scaffold. Using his descent as the final critical distraction, he watched from the dark shadow of the dome as the police carried Alexei's broken body out of the main entrance and drove him away in a black carriage. Vronsky knew Alexei had pressed the switch, and he also saw the rope, the one he'd thrown down to make his escape, lying coiled at the base of the tower's outside wall, ignored by the military as worthless debris. Vronsky needed to know if the message had been delivered. He waited until the early hours of the morning, when the military presence was concentrated inside the cathedral, securing the damaged spire. He descended the scaffold and slipped into the deserted cathedral square. The rope lay in a dark, forgotten heap. He approached it, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He ran his hands over the thick, worn fibers, searching, until he found the spot where he knew Alexei must have wedged the paper. His fingers encountered a stiffness, a small, densely packed foreign object buried deep within the braids. He worked quickly, tearing the fibers apart with his bare hands. Finally, he pulled it out, the tightly rolled, sweat-stained scroll. The paper was intact. The final directive was safe. He unrolled it, illuminating it with a shielded pocket lamp. The message was simple, a strategic adjustment based on the military movements he had observed from the tower. Victory demands the bridges be taken from the north. Hold Vyborg line. Advance at dawn. Vronsky smiled, a grim, exhausted expression. Alexei had risked everything, not just to send the signal, but to preserve the written order. Meanwhile, the people of Petrograd awoke to two profound and conflicting realities. First, the uprising was succeeding. Following the final majestic bong of the Blagovest, the Vyborg workers had successfully pushed across the bridges, confronting the demoralized imperial forces. The city was a battlefield, but the advantage was shifting. Second, the towering symbol of imperial authority, St. Isaac's Cathedral, was wounded. The great bell, the Tsar Bell miner, was visibly listing from its damaged mounts. Its voice was gone. The news spread through the city like wildfire. The Zvonar silenced the Tsar's bell. To the revolutionaries, the fractured bell was the greatest sign of victory. It was proof that the very voice of the empire, the bell that had rung for every Tsar's coronation and victory, had been silenced by a simple, honest worker, siding with the people. It was a physical, visible manifestation of the break between the populace and the old regime. Vronsky, clutching the directive, saw his mission now clearly. Alexei was gone, a martyr for the cause. The bell was broken, a symbol of the old world's fall. Now, Vronsky had to leverage these symbols. He went immediately to the nearest printing press, knowing that the real battle was now fought not with guns, but with words. He wrote an impassioned, anonymous pamphlet detailing the heroic sacrifice of the bell ringer, the treachery of the police, and the silencing of the Tsar Bell miner as a divine sign of the revolution's righteousness. He ended the pamphlet with the final coded instruction: advance at dawn.
Alexei Fyodorov was held not in a military prison, but in the cold, windowless basement of the Okhrana headquarters, notorious for its brutality. He was bruised, His arm was broken from the force of the blast, and the scent of gunpowder and dust clung to his tattered cassock. The interrogator was Colonel Yevgraf Volkov, a man known for his methodical cruelty and unwavering loyalty to the Tsar. Volkov stood before Alexei, slamming the table with a heavy, steel-ruled map of Petrograd. "The church you served is damaged, Zvonard," Volkov hissed, his voice like grinding ice. "The Tsar Bell Minor is silent. Your treason is written in the stone of St. Isaac's. Tell me the name of the organizer, the man you covered for. Vronsky, is that his name?" Alexei said nothing. He simply looked at the bare stone wall, a silence louder than any bell. "You think your silence is holy?" Volkov sneered. "We know he was up there. We know he used your spire as a command post. We found the snapped rope, the hole in the ceiling, the trail of dust. Tell me where he has gone. Where is the rest of his cell?" Alexei finally spoke, his voice weak but clear. "I acted alone, Colonel. I rang the bell because the city was starving, and the bell wanted to speak the truth. I damaged the room to protect the sacred bells from the sacrilege of military use. I did it for the church, not for the revolution." Volkov laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. He knew the old man was lying about acting alone, but the motive he offered was intriguing. Volkov struck a cruel nerve. "The church? You destroyed it. The Tsar Bell Minor is broken, its voice ruined, perhaps forever. That is your legacy, old fool. You think the Tsar will forgive you for defiling his cathedral? No, but you can save yourself and perhaps the church one final time." The colonel leaned in, his face inches from Alexei's. "I have men right now scaling the tower. We know the old Bolsheviks love to hide documents. We believe you hid the final written order for the uprising inside the structure. Tell me exactly where you hid the message. If you tell me, I can send my men to retrieve it discreetly. If not, I will order them to search every crevice, to chisel every stone, to tear down the bell tower until they find it. I will see St. Isaac's reduced to rubble, and the crime will be entirely yours." This was the trap. Alexei had protected Vronsky's directive by hiding it in the rope and allowing the rope to fall, knowing it would be overlooked. But he had also protected his own church by giving the police a reason to believe the command center was destroyed. Now, Volkov was threatening to destroy the cathedral in earnest. The very thing Alexei loved, the stone, the sacred space, the broken bell, would be ruined if he did not confess. Alexei closed his eyes, remembering the feel of the rope, the final, desperate act of Vronsky. He knew the rope was on the ground, likely retrieved by Vronsky hours ago, but Volkov did not. He decided to tell a lie that would save his church. "The directive," Alexei whispered, feigning defeat. "The directive was not hidden in the stone. It was hidden inside the bell itself." Volkov's eyes widened with surprise and greed. "Inside the bell? How?" "The clapper," Alexei rasped, inventing quickly. "It is hollowed out on the inside for balance. The organizer drilled a small hole and placed the paper inside. When the bell rang for the final time, the paper would shake loose, a signal of delivery. It must be inside the Tsar Bell Minor's clapper." Volkov grinned, a terrifying, predatory smile. A plausible, brilliant lie. The bell was already down, already damaged, the perfect place to hide a message. "A clever trick, Zvonar." "Very well," Volkov said, rising. "I will not tear down your spire. I will only dismantle your beautiful bell. If the message is there, you will have saved the tower. If it is not, well, we will start with the choir loft and work our way down." Volkov ordered his men to the cathedral with axes, drills, and orders to dismantle the massive clapper of the Tsar Bell Minor. Alexei knew the search would be fruitless. but it would buy Vronsky the necessary time. The revolution needed hours, and Alexei had just bought it days by turning the police's attention to the silent, broken heart of his church. Colonel Volkov, convinced by Alexei's desperate lie, diverted his full attention from the city's growing unrest to the broken bell. To Volkov, recovering the final revolutionary order was a greater prize than hunting down one organizer. It was a chance to understand and crush the entire movement. The operation to dismantle the Tsar Bell Minor began immediately, in daylight, in the heart of the city square. The soldiers, under Volkov's direct and intense supervision, used thick ropes, crowbars, and specialized tools to carefully pry apart the massive bronze clapper from the already damaged bell. The distraction. This activity was precisely the cover Fyodor Vronsky needed. The sight of imperial soldiers attacking the massive, beloved church bell was not seen by the public as a search for evidence. It was seen as an act of sacrilege and vengeance against a martyr. Vronsky's pamphlet detailing the Zvonar's heroic stand and the silencing of the bell was already being circulated by the hundreds. The clanging and hammering of the soldiers trying to break apart the bronze was interpreted by the masses as the final, brutal act of a collapsing, irreligious regime. All attention in the central square, from the remaining police to the watchful citizens, was fixed on the struggle between the soldiers and the bell. Vronsky used this immense public distraction to execute the advance at dawn strategy. Working with his network of organizers, he launched the final coordinated push. Northern bridges, armed workers, knowing the police were focused on the cathedral, quickly overwhelmed the few remaining guards on the northern Neva bridges. Communications. Vronsky's men seized the main telegraph office, ensuring that imperial forces in Moscow would not hear of Petrograd's fall until it was too late. The Winter Palace. The strongest revolutionary columns, following the directive Vronsky had recovered, bypassed the main guarded avenues and instead converged through side streets towards the Winter Palace, the final symbol of Tsarist power. By mid-morning, as the soldiers sweated and swore over the clapper, the distant but distinct sound of sustained machine gun fire and revolutionary cheers signaled the fall of the key strategic points. The distraction had worked perfectly. The symbolic destruction. Finally, with a tremendous, grinding screech of metal, the bronze clapper was separated from the bell. Volkov scrambled forward, desperate to retrieve the document. His men held lanterns, shining a light on the center of the massive, worn piece of metal. They found nothing.
There was no small drill hole, no hidden cavity. The clapper was solid, dented by years of striking the bell, but entirely whole. Alexei had lied, sending them on a devastatingly time-consuming and publicly damaging wild goose chase. Colonel Volkov, realizing the betrayal and the strategic error, screamed in impotent rage. He threw his gauntlet at the bell. "The Zvonar has won," one of the younger soldiers whispered, looking from the intact clapper to the smoke now visible over the rooftops of the city. In a final act of destructive frustration, Volkov ordered the clapper to be taken away and dumped into the Neva River. He could not recover the message, but he would ensure the bell could never speak again. The loss of the clapper, the heart of the bell, was the ultimate symbolic act. It confirmed to the people that the old regime had not just been defeated, but that it had brutally silenced the very voice of God and the city. The fractured Tsar Bell Minor became the unyielding, silent witness to the success of the revolution. By the time Volkov gathered his forces to address the real threat, the fighting had reached the Nevsky Prospect. The advance at dawn was now a full-scale triumph. The revolution, spurred by Vronsky's recovered directive and the immense symbolic power of the silent bell, swept through Petrograd like a flood. Within days, the Winter Palace fell. Tsar Nicholas II was forced to abdicate. The power of the Okrada evaporated overnight. Colonel Volkov, realizing his position was untenable and that he had been entirely distracted by a lie, fled the city, leaving his prisoners behind.